Today we have Scot Bryson. I met Scott years ago when you were running an ad agency, and I
Yeah.
think you sold that to a New York holding company.
Yeah.
And now you're the CEO of Orbital Farms. So just to give a kind of a breakdown, um, what is Orbital Farms and what is biotech and just these kind of bigger structural things so that people really understand where you're at and yeah, what your story is framed around.
Cool. Yeah. I'd be happy to share all that. Um, I've got an interesting journey. As you said, I originally when you and I met, I was running an advertising agency and I ran that for 10 years. Had some amazing experiences, and working in that industry is just it's really exciting because you get to dive really deep into all these different businesses, from tax companies to tire manufacturers to engineering groups to nonprofit funds. Um, and and you get to really understand these businesses really well, but you don't end up being able to take things through to fruition, and the problems that you end up solving are very consumer focused. They're very about how you sell more product, how you get more customers. um, it wasn't really as fulfilling for me personally, in thinking about what problems and what big problems I really could solve, what my brain should be focused on. If I've got all these skills and capabilities, what problems and challenges are really pressing and needed in the world. And some of the work over the years that we've done was working with the World Health Organization, was working with nonprofits that are focused on hunger, that understanding technologies that are being used to tackle climate change and utilizing carbon dioxide. And when I started to really get a bigger understanding and grasp of what's happening in our climate and the situation that we're in, it really started to scare me. And, really, this is a massive existential problem. And that, on top of the fact, when understanding, like, there's almost 1 billion people that don't have enough food to eat tonight. And right now they're hungry. That was almost 100 million more people because of COVID last year that have moved into that category. That, on top of the fact that, living in we're in Toronto, and we're very fortunate to be in a fantastic country and city, and come from, a privileged position, and our fridges are full and we can go get whatever type of food that we want at any moment. And that, coupled together with this huge inequality, that part is very unsettling, and I think it's frankly unacceptable. Um, and and when you start to understand business and some of these, when I started to understand, business and how technologies are financed and how investment is made in companies, and how, where energy and focus happens and the supply chains, and then what technologies and that companies are investing in, I really started to get a handle on the fact that, look, I think this is a challenge that's solvable. We have the technologies that are available to solve these issues. We've had greenhouses that are able to recycle water, and nutrients for hundreds of years. We've had, the ability to produce food, 10,000 times or more efficient than we have in just regular agriculture crops. And we've had the capabilities of keeping humans floating around in space for the past 20 years continually on the International Space Station. And yet we aren't focused on solving the problems here, and we're pumping CO2 into the atmosphere when we've got the ability to capture all of that. You know, all of these things were spinning around in my head. And after I sold my company, I was like, I want to dedicate my life. I've got 20, 25 years left in my career before I'm going to retire. I want to tackle those problems and those challenges. And, I think with the right positioning, if we can understand these technologies, if we can understand how to finance these technologies and these projects, we can start to, you know, take and take meaningful steps towards solving some of these challenges. Build a purposeful built company to start tackling those with taking action. And so this is what was Orbital Farm was born out of. And so Orbital Farm is is a project development firm. So we're taking existing technologies that are around the world that have been developed over sometimes long periods of time, and maybe are deployed in a few different places, but not really equally distributed, not really deployed at scale in places where it's, where impoverished people, where developing nations can utilize them, or even developed nations where there's huge food insecurity challenges, even here in North America. So that's what the main purpose would be, and to sort of develop projects that can convert carbon dioxide and electricity into a whole ecosystem of producing food, or how you take sort of this idea of waste streams. In nature, we don't have waste streams. That there's something that consumes everything. It just maybe has an incredibly long time frame for some for some components, but you know there are microbes that are specific to eating plastics even. So
Wow.
just taking that concept and applying it to how do you build purposeful built industrial projects that are focused with the same mindset in mind. And if we can do that, if we can build large systems that can produce food from electricity and carbon dioxide, then we can produce food anywhere. Whether that is in space, or whether that is in sub-Saharan Africa, or whether that is in northern communities. And that's how I think that we can be a catalyst to climate change. I think that's how we can be a catalyst to making change in how we produce food, and being ready for the next 100 years that is not going to look the same as the past 10,000. So
Right.
um, that's what Orbital Farm is.
So going from an industry like advertising, where there's a lot of thought process, a lot of creativity, envisioning things, like pitching things, writing things, and having that experience as an idea person, and then transitioning to what you're doing now. Like when I was reading about, I think I read somewhere that you're building like 200 greenhouses around the world. Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, so that's a goal that we're trying to set, because some of these technologies you asked about, what biotechnology is, and you know biotechnologies essentially are like walking into a brewery or a winery. Those are called bioreactors. You just put a bunch of grapes in, or you put a bunch of barley and hops and yeast in there, and the yeast consume the sugars and turn that into alcohol. That's a bioreactor system. You can use that same process, use different types of yeast or different types of organisms that can consume those things, and you're able to produce proteins and polymers and oils, and you can make food products out of those things, not just alcohol that we drink. And so some of these technologies, they're to produce a kilogram of protein with soybeans that you're going to grow in a farmer's field, you need to produce that same kilogram of protein. You can do that in a bioreactor, but 10,000 times less space you need than growing soybeans in a field.
Wow.
10,000 times more. Like, these are orders of magnitude more efficient. And
Yeah.
so when you look at these industries and businesses, a large scale fermentation facility, it can produce 100,000 tons of product a year. That's like, okay, that's how do I visualize 100,000 tons? That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What it turns out is some of these proteins are like, or some of the products that they're producing are 70%, 80% protein content. Each person, we need about 50 to 60 grams of protein per day. So if you look at in 2019, there was 820 million people that didn't have enough food. And so from those 820 million people, at 50 to 60 grams of protein per day, if you build 100,000 ton per year facility, that means one facility can produce enough protein for over 4.5 million people every single day for over 30 years that project is going to be developed. So if
Wow.
then you start asking, well, okay, with this 820 million people, how many of these facilities do we need to build to tackle that problem? And so that number turns out to be just a little over 180. And so that was really what was defining, okay, look, if we can build and develop 200 of these projects. Not all of them are going to be the biggest size and all the right locations, but if we can develop 200 projects in a short time frame, that makes ending world hunger actually an achievable goal,
Right.
not some like wishy-washy idea. This is a practical, realizable. It's hard. Like, look, building one project is incredibly difficult, but this is not impossible. Our society, we built thousands of projects and developed, hundreds of real estate projects, industrial projects just in Canada alone. So this is not an unsolvable challenge. And so that really was what drove that. Look, if we can develop a company and an organization that is built to how do you structure an organization to build that many projects? You don't have to have every single construction worker. You can hire and contract the right people, but if you can build an organization that can do this and deploy these projects at scale, now we can have a way and a mechanism for policymakers, for governments, for philanthropic organizations to actually, you know, take action towards ending world hunger, which, according to the Sustainable Development Goals, this is goal number 2 of ending world hunger by 2030. That's 8.5 years from now.
Wow.
So, we're going in the wrong direction, and this is a pathway to make that happen. So that's behind that, 200. That's why the 200.
Yeah.
Um,
So how do you, like, for someone who came from an industry that was very much like a communication, creative energy, and then now what you're doing is so physical, like vaccines, food, like it's such a physical experience, building structures, real estate, like how do you move from having something that's communication and idea based to like actually like doing physical projects in the world? Like how do you
yeah.
transition, and what, just as a person?
Um, a lot of reading, a lot of studying, a lot of scientific papers, um, a, a lot of networking, building a really wide network of individuals and and experts, seeking those people out, who are the leading experts, really understanding where their heads at, what are some of the limitations to their technologies and the limitations to them scaling. But at the core of it all, actually, the communication space and the advertising space really, I think, gave me the best footing to be where I am today and to build this organization. Because, again, in order to work with any new client in the communication space, I you're going to pitch a tax client. I don't really know all the details and ins and outs of the tax software. I hadn't maybe before I hadn't had a client in that space, but I've got to study it really quickly, and I've got to understand really deep, their technology, what their differentiators are, what their consumers want, what their investors need to hear, what their competitors are doing, and I've got to understand their competitive advantage, and I got to understand all of that really quickly, and I've got to be able to get both up to speed with the technology, but then truly understand their main pain points. And so that ability and that skill of honing, both studying and understanding technologies quickly, really helped train my capability to be able to do that in different technologies. And it's there's a general framework to social psychology. There's a general framework to how technologies are developed and built, and so you can understand some of those components. Curiosity is a big natural part of me, and I love learning about these things. So it's not a challenge. And in fact, I was doing this in my spare time anyways, because it's just of interest. And so um, that part wasn't a big challenge. Certainly, there is a learning curve that is massive and steep and scary. And there's a lot of things I don't know, but, you know, being vulnerable and being open and honest about what you don't know and bringing the experts of people around you that do, that's the way you solve that. And that even leads into management. The best way to manage organizations is to surround yourself with teams of experts that are way smarter than you, and you build an organization that can help enable those people. And that's the way, that's the leadership style that I take. and that has, led to successful businesses in my past, and has led to, the successes that I've seen here and today as well.
When I was having a conversation recently, I had this like, I came off really judgmental, and I was like, kind of went on this little rant about like young people and how I'm someone who's like, I've been in the self-development industry for a long time, and like with like spiritual communities for a long time. And so I often encounter young, passionate people who, they get into these zones of like, they really, really care about something. They really care about climate change, or they really care about, whatever topic it is. And, but then they have this resistance to politics and business, like where they think like capitalism is evil and like politicians are evil. And it's like, so I was like on this like little rant where I'm like, I wish that young people who are really passionate didn't have that kind of fear of like capitalism and politics, because it's like to actually get something done and actually change something in the world, they kind of have to learn how to like work with all of these different people. And I know that deep down inside, I can see sometimes that young people, like sometimes like, if like a suit walks into the room, they're nervous. It's not just the rejection of grown-ups. It's like they're genuinely nervous. They're genuinely intimidated. I've had those experiences. But
Yeah.
for young people who are passionate about something, how can, like, what kind of advice can you give? I know you like mentor people. What kind of advice can you give for young people that are like, they are passionate, but then they just want to hang out with people like them and like, do ayahuasca and like, like enjoy whatever, their ascension, whatever, and like become more conscious, but they're like, they have that block. What kind of advice can you give to young people to just like help them with the practical, like, business is necessary, politics are necessary, and you're capable of like actually implementing things locally and globally?
So really good questions. And I know, I've met many of these people as you're describing as well. That passion really does come through, and it's strong and it's real. It's not false. Where I think people get stuck is in fear. And fear comes in many different facets, right? Fear comes from self-doubt, comes from lack of understanding, a fear of not being able to be successful. And so there's a point in any sort of these experiences that people are having, or these, desires and motivations. If you're passionate about climate, how do we get in front of climate change? And if you do have this resistance to, the business world, come up with a better solution. If you dislike a system and an approach that how things are done, create a better one. But the answer then quickly is, well, I'm not sure how to do that. Then that's the work that you need to undertake. If you don't like how something is being done today, be the catalyst to make that change. And if you don't understand it, guess what? You just found your next task. Understand it more. And if you can't, you can take it to a certain point, and you can watch YouTube videos, and you can read scientific papers, and you can read press releases, and you can read studies and reports and take courses. And once you've understood it to that next phase, and you're like, oh, I get why the system is like that. Back to my original thesis, I still think, the way that capitalism is built is ineffective, or, it still leaves all of these people, it optimizes, my grudge with that is that it optimizes mostly to low cost everything. And that leads to, child labor making our chocolate, and consumers at the end of at the store not wanting to pay more than $1.25 for a chocolate bar. And that continues to lead down that pathway. So I think I don't know of the better solutions, but I understand the mechanisms that are in place right now. And the way to disrupt that, in the view of Orbital Farms, for me, is start tackling challenges of supply sourcing and supply chains, and voting with your dollar and choosing chocolates that are more expensive, or or writing to companies that you do love and are passionate about, and telling them that you're what challenges and issues are. Those moments of action that you can take when you identify a challenge and problem, both externally and also internally with yourself. So, really being conscious internally of what your inner voice is really telling you, where your fears and insecurities really are. And if you can learn to listen to that much more clearly and figure actionable steps to take towards, working through something, you're going to go a long way. And the other big piece that's tied to this is that you're going to get it wrong 150 times before you're going to get a maybe. So be okay with being wrong. And so, okay, well, I think we've got a major climate problem and people should just stop using oil and gas. Great. Okay, so how do we do that? And come into an actionable, well, we're just gonna shut off all the gasoline and shut down all the pipelines. Okay, well then, you know, dive into that a little bit deeper. Oh, okay, maybe that wasn't the best idea because all the homes, we can't actually manufacture enough heat pumps to electrify every heating home in Canada, and a million people would die of cold and starvation if we did that. Okay, maybe that's not the best solution tomorrow. So we'll do that next year. And then just continue to refine it. But it's the idea of being okay that you're wrong. It's the idea of putting out a concept out there and continuing to refine it over time. Orbital Farm's vision did not come together. We've been around 3 years tomorrow, actually.
Wow.
It takes a significant amount of time to get there, to refine what you're trying to do, to understand the problem at a really deep core. And, to be honest, we don't understand all the problems and challenges yet. And we've got a huge amount more learning to go through. So it is always a journey. And that's a long-winded way of some advice uh, for those people. But yeah.
So when you started out, like, I think I read somewhere you were 22. Is that when you started your entrepreneur journey?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what inspired you to go that route, like to do something entrepreneurial, and what fears did you have and how did you overcome that?
Um, so I guess I've always had sort of a engineering mindset and a creativity mindset. Coming out of high school, I was like, my top marks were physics and art. And
Wow.
I like business. Like, I took a couple business classes and I like psychology. And so that, I looked at my skills, and I applied for transportation design and engineering at Coventry. And I also applied to advertising design at OCADU. And I was very divided on which pathway to go. And so I ultimately chose the advertising side of things. And I didn't think I was really going to be an entrepreneur. Like, I invented silly things when I was a kid, and did, lots of side jobs, and learned about money early on. But when I was 22, I was working at an advertising agency while I was still in university. And this is 2005, and so that's the same year YouTube was founded, just to have a digital time stamp in our minds, where what the internet was like back then. It was not many websites so you could even find video and online video stuff. So it was a wild west, and advertising agencies just didn't know what to do. They had all these great teams and talent and staff, and they didn't know how to tell stories online. They didn't know how to communicate well. Just even physical act of develop programming a web banner, people didn't really know how to do that. That was back in the Flash days. And so it was born out of opportunity. And there was some opportunities with some projects that I was working on at the agency. We couldn't find somebody to work on it. My best friend and I could figure it out a couple times, and so we said, look, we'll do this over the weekend or a couple nights and evenings. And we started making some money on the side from the agencies, and our name got passed around to the point where I had to quit. I was like, okay, I'm just going to quit the job because I'm doing more work in the evenings and on my weekends than I am during the day full time with you. So I sort of fell into this opportunity of understanding a space that no one really understood quite yet, which I guess, if in saying it that way, is sort of what I'm trying to do with Orbital Farm as well. People don't really understand the climate problem and the hunger problem and how to solve those, how to solve those problems. So just being in front of those challenges and unsolved problems is, I guess, what I did at the beginning of this. Um, and I just, you keep getting smaller wins. And yeah, it was really scary, and it was really hard doing it too, because you don't have nothing is stable, but you work through it. You you know you work off of some of the successes that you've got, that takes you through to some of the deep lows that you do hit and experience, because you're going to fail a lot. So at the earlier stage, it actually was a bit easier because we were very in demand and there wasn't really much competition. And then later on, as we grew to 10 people and 20 people and 30 people, the stresses become much more real, and you realize, oh wow, you're the head of this organization, and if you don't do your job well, you know your rent may not be paid, but more importantly, your 30 employees and their families and their kids, they're all relying on you to make sure that this organization is working well, and you've got new clients and customers, and that everyone's happy. And it's a significant amount of pressure. So there are emotional roller coasters, there are physical roller coasters that you're going through, just in terms of financing and cash flow. And anyway, those, you gotta have good self reflection and self confidence. Yeah.
And was there ever a time where you thought that like it was too tough or it was too hard, or and how did you get over that, or like what did you do for yourself that you were able to keep going and stay focused?
um, I mean, you get imposter syndrome all the time. Or I do. And in my previous job before starting, Stone Canoe was my old company. um, I had one of my mentors. He was the founder of one of the most successful audio recording studios in Canada. He's an author of multiple books. He's got his own. Still has a number of radio shows. He's been on TV. He would give talks to all these different advertising agencies. Truly like a pioneer in the industry, in the audio industry. And I remember sitting him down early on. Must have been 20 years old or something, and just talking to him about things. And back then, I remember him saying, Scott, I have a 50-person company, and I can tell you, not a month goes by, or not a week goes by, do I sit and I have imposter syndrome. Like, how did I get here? Someone's going to find out, like, I'm a farce, and my writing is crap, and people have just been lying to my face this whole time. This is coming from a gentleman with wild success, and happy and healthy career, beautiful family, wife, 3 kids, like truly just like a model of what any entrepreneur could hope for. And he still has imposter syndrome. So knowing that that's normal, that really helped, to be totally honest. And I still I use that thought today, not, look, maybe not actually today, but certainly this week, where you have those doubts and fears. I gave a talk to a really big um event, and I was on a panel, and I'm sitting beside somebody. I'm not physically sitting, we're on Zoom, but I'm beside one of the lead plant scientists at NASA, and one of the top organizations in the world that's working on cellular agriculture, and another person who leads another company that's like head of nutrition, and like these people with all PhDs, all incredibly intelligent and successful and tenured. And you definitely go through moments you're like, wow, this is an imposter syndrome moment. But okay, look, I'm here because they want me to be here. I didn't ask to be here. And I do have contribution to make here, and what I am saying is valuable, and people are interested in listening. Okay, well, these are the indications you need to keep reminding yourself, okay, just keep going. That's today's hard, but tomorrow's going to be easier. And if it's not, then figure out what you can do to make that happen. Yeah.
How has the pandemic been for you guys? And were you in the vaccine space before the pandemic, or how did that happen?
Yeah. So the vaccine stuff is interesting. So I got introduced to a vaccine manufacturer 2 years ago now. So well before the pandemic, and under different contexts. So we were looking at automation systems in greenhouses, and one of the scientists at NASA had recommended this company, and had said, these guys have some really interesting robotics. You should check that out. And so I started diving into them and looking very much at the robotics side of things. But when I started understanding what the company was doing, it was really transformative in the way I thought. And what they were doing was using plants to actually produce vaccines. And so this component of, well, what you need and the limiting factor to scaling that technology is you need pharmaceutical grade greenhouses. But these plants are incredibly efficient at manufacturing and incredibly low cost and low prices. And they can do it really fast and really quickly. And we have a global distribution knowledge of agriculture systems and food production systems that we can translate into this capability to be able to produce uh, therapeutic products, vaccines for viruses that are unknown or viruses that aren't being addressed, and for a cost that is actually affordable to every person on the planet. And so that was a really, big wow moment, and a big part of orbital farm projects are greenhouses or biotechnology systems and aquaculture systems. And so if we could, the thought came, well, if we could build our facilities instead of just a food grade, and we could upgrade these facilities to be pharmaceutical grade, we could build food production factories and facilities with this dual purpose in mind, that, hey, we can manufacture vaccines and we can build a really large scale facility to grow food. And in pandemic moments, we can transition that food production facility into manufacturing vaccines really quickly and rapidly, instead of slowly and trickling out into a smaller facility that you'd normally build. This can get us to that capability. And so that was really part of the framework that we started working on early on. The discussions obviously accelerated during the pandemic. Right now we're still, we haven't built any facilities. We explored the idea, here in Ontario, to acquire another greenhouse and convert it into a pharmaceutical facility. We explored developing other projects in the United States to increase the manufacturing capacity in Europe as well. So, those are still some ongoing conversations, and as well into the Middle East. But, I really, the model and the framework is still very true. It's still this dual use component of food and plants for medicine type of approach. And this is applicable everywhere. And I still, it still applies to, the 200 model. If each facility can manufacture 50 million doses of a vaccine, 200 facilities, we could have a distributed manufacturing system, and truly make this the last inequitable distribution of vaccines, that we're currently going through and was forecasted at the beginning of this pandemic. We're very fortunate in Canada. I don't know if we're over 50%, but we're about 50% vaccinated here, and many countries don't even have one dose. So, this is not being equally distributed. Again, we're very fortunate, but most of the world isn't. So, and I don't think that's right. Not when we have this capability, not when we have the technology that's been able to do this. And this is not, again, this is an example of an older tech, not older, but, this has been around since the 90s. And the team that was working on these plant-based vaccines, they had developed vaccines for SARS. That was almost 10 years ago. And so, they were able to take that work and research from the SARS successes that they had back then, and they were able to create a vaccine that right now is in the final phase 3 trials, and it has incredible results so far from their phase 2 trials and phase 1 trials. But they were able to come up with this vaccine in 19 days. 19 days from receiving the virus to a solution. That's how fast and how transformative these types of technologies really are. And so if we're lucky that coronavirus isn't more deadly. And if we're in a situation where it's even more deadly than this, which is very possible in the future, we need to have a resilient system in place, not planning after it happens to try to figure out what to do or anything like that. So anyway, that's the vaccine journey.
So I read in an article in Forbes that you wrote about NASA, like a NASA forgotten microbial recipe that can feed hundreds of millions of people on Earth. How did you discover this, or how did you find out about this? And then what are you doing with this information now?
Yeah, great question. So, that's the technology that I was describing earlier that can produce protein 10,000 times more efficient than soybeans. Um, NASA worked this out in the late 60s when, they had money to be able to look at how do we put humans in space? And when you start thinking about the problem of, well, if we're going to go on a long-term mission, which, if you want to go to Mars, you're going to be there for 3 years, just the orientation of the planets and how far it is. It's a 3-year return mission to get there and back. So if you're going to go for that length of time, it takes significant amount of food just to feed those astronauts. 4 people take 24,000 pounds of food for 4 people for 3 years. So, and we're talking about, incredibly optimized, almost no food waste, that type of scenario. And so they looked at Earth's ecosystems and they said, well, we recycle carbon here and in our soils and actually in our guts, in our microbiome right now, and in the bottoms of lakes and oceans and soils, there's something called the dark ecosystem, and it doesn't have sunlight, and it consumes all these different waste materials that have fallen down or the things that we eat, and it converts the very base elements of carbon dioxide, of oxygen, of hydrogen, of ammonia, and these they convert those into food. In fact, these organisms are so novel that they bind hydrogen oxygen molecules together and they make water. That's
Wow.
that's the work that they do, is they make water. And so they're incredible. That's their waste product, but they eat carbon dioxide. And so NASA came across this and they said, well, look, we can sidestep this whole massive ecosystem that we have here, because these organisms are the base part of our ecosystem, and they're taking the base elements and the waste products of the world, they're building them up into amino acids, and then little shrimp and little smaller fish are eating those, and then bigger fish are eating those, and then you get a salmon. And so the amino acids that are being built and created, salmon don't make those. The microbes that are being bioaccumulated through that whole ecosystem, that's what's making them. And so they're just shortcutting and using biotechnology to just shortcut that gap and produce the food. This was done in the late 60s. And then, 1972 was the last human on the moon. And NASA's budget said, okay, no, we're blowing up all this stuff. Blowing up is maybe the wrong term in space, but we're not funding humans in space now. We're gonna focus on building the shuttle, and we're gonna focus on reallocating our money into launch systems. And the technology was forgotten, and the people that worked there retired, and the companies that were hired to build these systems moved on to other things, and it got lost for a long period of time. And so there was a company that came across this technology when they were looking to build biofuels, and in the early 2000s, when people were like, okay, great, we can replace oil with biological systems, and these incredible researchers and PhDs came across this work, and they said, look, we could convert CO2 into oils. We can use these same organisms and produce oils. That's the way that that this can really disrupt the fuel system. And so they started working on this. They eventually changed and pivoted into making polymers for plastic, making oils for replacing palm oils, and making proteins for aquaculture feeds and human food products. So they've been working on this, yeah, since early 2000s, and I guess this is a long-winded answer so for all this stuff. Sorry, but
It's
when
really
I first started down the pathway to Orbital Farm, when I put my systems thinking hat on, I figured the best way to get through the climate challenge is to look at carbon dioxide like a valuable resource. And if we can transition corporations and the general public into what we're currently perceiving as, well, we didn't even know it was being emitted. I mean, we knew, but we didn't really know. It wasn't in the general top of mind thought process that it is for a lot of people now. But if we can look at that as a valuable waste stream and look at the past 200 years, like back in history, if we fast forward into the future and look back at this time period, as we were a bunch of stupid humans that were just emitting all this CO2 that was valuable, and you could make carbon nanotubes and cement and plastics and polymers and oils and diamonds. You can make all these things out of this resource that we're just pumping into the atmosphere. That's causing downstream repercussions and challenges and changes to our climate. But this is a valuable resource, and if we can identify technologies that create those sort of shining light beacons, that's really the big transition. And so through that thought process led me to finding this NASA work and this company that was working on commercializing the technology. Honestly, 10 minutes after finding out about this company, I emailed the CEO and I was like, I don't know what I can do, how I can help. I ran an agency, I've talked to investors, I've built pitch decks, I've negotiated terms and deals. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but you've been around for 5 or 6 years and I've never heard about you. And I've been looking in this space for a long time. That's a problem. Let me help. And I jumped in. I flew myself
wow.
out to go meet the team. We got on a call. I got on a call with the CEO. I said, pay me if I bring cash to your company. I want to learn and I want to help. Like, the world needs this technology more than anything. And I don't know what I can do. Maybe one day I can figure out how to make this work in space. But for now, let me just help. And so I spoke with 350 companies around the world that had CO2 problems, that were investors that were looking into these problems, that were large corporations that had supply chains that they were looking to secure. I helped, do pro formas and feasibility studies. I helped, find them an engineering group that could get them out of the lab. It was 16 PhDs working on this at the time. I found them a couple of customers that would pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars for samples to start utilizing their product into different other products as an ingredient. I found them a customer that would pay for a pilot facility that could, where they could start producing the product at larger scales. So, and then I sort of started weaving that together within what Orbital Farms really could be. And I said, look, I'm tired of convincing other people that this is a great technology. I know this is a great technology. I'm going to build an organization that's going to support this and technologies like this, and I'm going to build the ecosystem around it. The renewable energy side of things, the greenhouses could be interconnected with it, the aquaculture systems. I really see this as sort of the next generation of food production systems that are completely climate independent. So that's, yeah.
What do you think is a realistic time frame for feeding the hungry people around the world, and then also needing like larger food production for space and space travel? What do you think is just like a realistic time frame that, I don't know, seems
Yes, it's a good question. So let's start with the space one first. So the space question, we're gonna have astronauts going to the moon in 2 years, you know, or around the moon, in a couple of years from now. So we're we have astronauts on the International Space Station right now, but it's much easier to just send food up there because it's a short trip and you know, we've got a lot of launch capabilities now. We're going to be building what NASA is hoping to be able to fund is sustainable systems on the moon. to test technologies, to explore, conduct research. It's still easier there to ship food than it is to set up food manufacturing systems, but there's going to be a need to have backup life support systems. There's going to be a need for fresh food and produce. Right now, they're growing, different types of plants on the International Space Station. Those experiments have been going on for a while, and astronauts are eating like the lettuce and things that are being grown.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's happening. It's not providing their daily nutrition, but it's working. So I think I think in the next 10 years we're definitely going to see a number of greenhouses. That China has already landed a greenhouse on the far side of the moon, and it grew a cotton seed. It wasn't designed to live through the lunar night, which is 14 days of sunlight and 14 days of darkness. So it only lasted for a couple of weeks, but it grew on the moon. We've and China was the first country to do that, and so we've had that ability now, or we're starting that ability. So we're beginning, but these are still the beginning phases and steps of this. Um, Elon, if
Wait,
Elon had
is that from the water? Is that from the things becoming water? Like
no,
how the
so
seed grew?
no, it was a very concealed capsule. It was pretty small. I think it was like a container, something like a cylinder like this. Um, and inside it had an automatic watering system and lights to be able to grow. And so it watered. I think there was like 6 different plants. Don't quote me on this part, but there was a number of different plants, and the cotton seed one was the only one that germinated and sprouted. Um,
Oh.
yeah, but amazing that that was even able to happen. These are not easy challenges. That how plants are going to grow in partial gravity, because the gravity is not the same. We know that in microgravity and on the International Space Station, that's like the roots need to be the seed needs to be pointed in a specific direction so the roots can go down. The top of the plant will typically go towards the light. So as long as you've got a good light source, plants can grow sideways or upside down even. But the roots are important. So anyways, there's a lot of understanding that needs to happen, but how long in space before we can do this, or it's going to be needed? Elon Musk wants to send 100 people to Mars in the next 10 years. That's a lot of work in order for us to do that. That's 600,000 pounds of food for those 100 people. That's like 2 of their new starships, if they're able to make that function and work in that time frame. That's a lot of food. So you want to be able to have a backup system that's going to be there. So theoretically, within the next 10-15 years, we're going to see systems that are being used to produce food in space in meaningful sizes and quantities. I think back to the question here on Earth, how do we end? What's that time frame for global hunger? So the world got together and set up these sustainable development goals, and number 2 is ending world hunger, and by 2030. So the World Food Program today can feed people for very, very low cost. Certainly pull people out of starvation for sometimes less than $1 a day. These are realistic challenges that need to be met. It's going to come down to a couple of factors. One, it's going to come down to, are governments serious about meeting these goals? If they are, the current plan really is to create rounding errors in the global financial system and provide food to some of these NGOs to be able to, and funding to be able to procure and buy food in these different for these different impoverished people and hungry people. And while that's a short-term solution, it's a very short-term solution. We're talking about billions of dollars going to providing food to these people, and always and having to rely on that year after year after year. A better system and a better approach to this is building infrastructure and teaching these areas and developing projects that can actually use the resources that are available there to manufacture and create food in those areas. And that's truly what I'm trying to build Orbital Farm to be, is an investable solution that governments, philanthropic organizations, NGOs can use, can have a vehicle to finance these food production systems that can go from, an area that has a ton of sunlight, and that sunlight is causing drought and soil erosion, um, and food insecurity challenges, to turning that into a resource where we can convert renewable energy into food production systems, and that food production system can then both provide food for the local populations, but then create export products to other markets in other countries. That model and system, that we can achieve in the next 10 years. That's something that we can build and work towards, alleviating global hunger by building a network of these manufacturing facilities and bringing together some of the more advanced technologies to produce food in these areas, to create jobs, to pull people out of poverty, which is, really the underlying mechanism to why, the climate change and poverty are the two main pillars that are driving the hunger situation. So, I mean, there's obviously a whole bunch of factors that are part of that, but those are the big ones.
Why do you think, like, just as humans, as a species, why are we able to do these huge things, like get funding to like build spaceships and, but we have like so many people that don't have, sanitation, like they don't have clean water, they don't have food, they don't have like a place to go to the bathroom. Like, why do you feel like just as a species, we are able to like do these crazy epic things, but then for just like for survival, like we haven't kind of gotten that foundation yet?
I think it's recognizing, well, that's a deep question, but I think one of the components is recognizing food as a human right is a really, people say it, and a lot of people believe it, but it's not, people may want to believe it is maybe a better way of saying it, but people aren't acting on it, and people aren't financing and funding it. And I think that stems from a lot of different reasons. I think it's connected to, you probably have a neighbor that's within 100, if you're in downtown Toronto, within, a few hundred meters of you, who right now is hungry and doesn't have enough food to eat. So do you know who they are? Could you walk over and give them the food? I bet you if they came up to your door and knocked on your door, or saw you and asked you for a meal, and you legitimately thought that they needed it and didn't have another way of getting it, you probably would help them out. We have that empathetic component that's in a deep part of most of us. But I think what happens is we lose that connection, when numbers get too big, when the problem becomes so existential. We're very connected closely to our community and our friends and our family, and that's, we have a difficult time keeping a community greater than 100 people. It's a hard challenge to do. I think 150 people is really, the most that you're really able to interact with on a regular and ongoing basis. So people within that network is really, the circle of influence. I think then when you apply that to a society, the underlying mechanism to each of that breaks down into, well, these are forgotten people. We're struggling to feed our people and to have enough capital to fund our healthcare system and fund our education system, and we don't have time to think about the people in Sudan, or the farmers in Namibia who have gone through drought for so long, or the farmers in India who just had COVID and then had a global locust challenge problem to deal with, and their crop decimation. Like, so many layered problems on layered problems when you're overwhelmed at home with dealing with a pandemic and dealing with so many other components of challenges. I think these lead to some of those issues. But the same argument, I want to tie this back to space for a moment, because the same argument is had in space, where why are we investing billions of dollars in space when we have so many problems here at home? Like that's I would say the largest argument against investing in that. And the reality though is that we actually have enough people and money to solve both of those problems. We have to choose to solve both of those problems. That's not a binary decision. It's a binary decision for you or me and what you want to focus on, because you have very limited time. But when you have 7 billion people and you have 200 governments and you have a financial system that truly makes up money, like we print money, it's called quantitative easing to, alleviate situations like we're currently in. We have a choice to make, and we can make these choices if we want to. That's the really important point of all of this, is that if we choose that this is a priority, it can be solved in a fast and steady pace and tackle that problem in a very short time frame. We just have to choose to want to do it. You look at back, in the early 2000s, there was, during the biofuel time, ethanol manufacturing facilities were being built and constructed. In the United States alone, they were building about 150 projects of every single year for these ethanol facilities in the United States. That took up, the majority of the cranes and the steel manufacturing and the facilities to build these projects. Investors were pouring money into it because the oil market was so massive. And here's a capability of growing corn and growing food products and converting them to oil and being self-sufficient in energy for the United States. And there's all this money and all this resources that got put into it. Now, the price of oil fell through and a lot of those businesses and investors lost a bunch of money. But the important part of that story is that capitalistic system was able to come together, organize, tackle a challenge and problem when they wanted to, or when the incentives were correct, to be able to go through this issue and challenge. We have the capability of doing this. We just need to be organized. We need to be surrounded by a story that everyone can align with, where the interests and motivations are aligned with each of the different parties and the actors that are part of this group. We can make these things happen. And the market situation that is being set up today, even just yesterday, there were some landmark announcements with Shell and with Exxon and these oil and Suncor. I think I was reading this morning, I haven't finished the articles, but the boards of these companies are massively changing now to focus and majorly reduce their carbon footprints. I don't know how much of this is PR and marketing, and I don't know how much depth is going into this, and they're still probably going to be making oil, which are still going to ultimately cause carbon emissions. But these big changes will have huge repercussions, positive repercussions into how systems are being developed. And the new economy that's going to emerge from this is a carbon economy, is a renewable energy economy. And the good thing about carbon dioxide is that it's a gas and it's equally distributed everywhere on the planet. And it's 417 parts per million here in Toronto, and it's 417 parts per million in Hawaii and in Indonesia and in Africa. And maybe it's a couple points up or down here or there, but it needs to be removed everywhere. And so we can choose to remove it here in Toronto, or we could choose to remove it in Namibia. And we can make a decision to, in fact, start removing carbon in some of these more developing nations where renewable energy is considerably cheaper to be able to produce there than it is here. And it actually ends up being, from an economic standpoint, more cost effective to start implementing projects in these developing countries where they are stricken with drought situations, and they are in remote areas where they do have lots of available land that isn't producing food. We can make these decisions if we choose to and we want to. Anyway.
What is it like for you being someone who has a background in advertising? Like, where for advertising, it's like, I'm guessing you have a lot of knowledge about what gets people moving, what gets people thinking, what gets people buying, what gets people investing. And then moving into the space you're in now, it's like there's so many people that it sounds like you're working with who have this really specified knowledge.
Yeah.
and they're working on these big projects, but it's like a regular everyday person is just like, oh, taking selfies for their Instagram. Like, how do you being that person who's like standing in the center? I feel like because your mind has both understandings really clearly and exposure to both really clearly. For you, what is that duality like to kind of
It's
see things like in such a interesting way?
it's it's challenging. Um, it's challenging because it's challenging because right now you see a lot of pathways, and right now the potential opportunities and the potential outcome space is really vast and wide. Um, so I don't know if you know anything about quantum physics, but I think about things like in waveforms, and as decisions get made, those waveforms begin to collapse, and okay, the number of available options in this area collapses down to, okay, well, this is really clearly what the most probable outcome is going to be in this pathway. And so that's sort of that's how I think about the whole overall situation and problem. And over time, and as the concept gets refined further, as I have more conversations with different technologies and companies, that the image becomes clearer and clearer over time. And that's, I guess, the way I think about it. When I think about back to the system design of, well, how do we make it the largest impact? Food, carbon dioxide, and utilizing carbon dioxide in value was a really big component. But another big weighting factor into this was, how do we make individual contribution? If truly these are decisions that as a society we can choose to solve these problems if we want, how do you make that action happen, and how do you make that happen on an individual contribution way? And one of the things that you look for in advertising and marketing, and is purchase frequency. And when you've got purchase frequency, you've got a lot of different times to be able to change someone's perspective, to be able to switch a brand from one brand to the next, to be able to try a new product, and something new. And food is really unique in the fact that it's probably the most purchase frequency has the most purchase frequency. If we've got enough money to be able to afford 3 meals a day, we're buying something 3 times a day. And I don't know what I'm having for dinner tonight. It's 3 p.m. and in a few hours I'm going to be making food, and I don't know what I'm going to get and what I'm going to prepare. And my purchase decision of choosing to eat, a burger that's beef flowing from Argentina or Brazil, and some exotic fruit that's brought in from a subtropical island, and a product that uses a bunch of palm oil, and something else that's been packaged and manufactured in China and flown over here to Toronto, and a salad that's been grown in California and then trucked all the way across the country, and then and stored for a week before it's even gotten to my plate. My purchase decision of choosing that meal versus something that's locally sourced, something that's been grown within close proximity to our house, that is, say, a fish instead of beef, or in the future could be cellular agriculture grown, so not even growing animals and just growing the muscle cells that of the components of the animal that we want to eat.
Oh, wow.
Like, these technologies are here now. And in fact, you can do that if you're in Singapore. They've already, you can get home delivered cellular agriculture food now in Singapore.
Wow.
So that purchase decision for the person in Singapore to choose that product, and yeah, it's going to be more expensive but it's not going to be in a very short time frame. It's not going to be more expensive. But even from a local perspective, that purchase decision and that power that an individual has to be able to vote has huge repercussions to the whole supply chain, to the companies that are successful, to the investors that are indicating which technologies they should invest in, to even local jobs in your area. And with a large number of purchase frequency, that gives that capability for us to really make change and put that power into people's hands. And Agriculture accounts for 24% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. The energy sector accounts for 26. So we're talking about, the second largest sector that's contributing to greenhouse gas emissions that we have an opportunity to make change in, that has true transformational and very rapid capability of making change. And it's so that's one of the underlying strategies into this, why we're choosing to produce food, how that is something that is universal also. When you're trying to think about big change globally, you've got to have things that you and I connect over. If this was any other time, we'd be having a coffee together, or we'd be having a meal together. And if I'm going to go travel in a new place and I'm going to meet other individuals, again, it's like food is deeply personal to us, both from our families, our heritage, our history, the countries that we're from. And that's also a really important piece, because you got to start making people make emotional decisions. And if we can work with things, food, in that allow people to make emotional decisions, and we can appeal to their mentality, that's how we can, I think, make significant change. And these can be the catalysts to, the bigger industrial changes that need to happen. So I think that answers your question.
So for like you as an entrepreneur, what does your typical day look like?
It's so there's not really a typical day. I do spend a lot of time reading. I'll read probably an hour and a half in the morning, different either publications, interesting articles, announcements. Though, like, understanding the new and up and coming technologies is pretty hard to keep on top of all of those. I'll typically have a number of different conference calls together. I'm part of a large number of different working groups, both with our consultants and our team. So participating in a few of those. It's researching or understanding a specific technology that may have come across or someone has recommended to me. So again, diving in a little bit deeper into how this could fit, and then trying to organize that into the architecture of what we're trying to do. There's the fun administrative and the back side of the back office stuff of being an entrepreneur that sucks, but is the reality of the situation. So that ends up taking some of the time. A few phone calls, mainly Zoom or video calls these days. But typically what it is.
And what do you wish you knew when you were younger?
What do I wish I knew? Oh, I feel like I guess if I could tell my past self, keep leaning into curiosity, knowing that things things work out, honestly. But I've had that for a long time. I've been very fortunate. My parents brought me up really well, and they gave me a really good footing to begin. And I have had that confidence that things are just going to work out, and I've been able to balance work and happiness and life, I think, quite well. I would, the advice that I described before, the imposter syndrome component, I did get that fairly early, I would say, certainly in my career. So that's definitely helped. Keep building your network. But again, for me, that really comes easily because it's what I really enjoy. Surround yourself with good people.
And where can people find out more about what you're doing? Like, where can they find you online?
So you can go to orbital.farm as the company website. You can find me on Twitter. I'll post interesting articles or things that I find interesting. So Scot Bryson, @Scot Bryson is my Twitter handle. Scott with one T, and Bryson. So yeah, but if people are interested in what I'm describing, or are interested in supporting this or learning more, there's a lot of different calls to action on the website that can take you to how to email me or get in touch. Um, Letters of support behind ideas like this. You asked about the International Space Station, and how did that's the most expensive asset that humanity's built, and how did that come together? It came together with 40,000 letters of support of people saying we need to do this, and we, as the United States and as NASA, we can't do it alone, and it takes a global community to build and develop this, and this will truly help our species move forward, and it takes letters of support to make that happen. So if anything that I've said is interesting, at the bare minimum, do that. Write a, hey, I think Orbital Farms mission is great, or even as simple as that, and putting your name behind it, that has weight, and that makes things happen. So that would be my minimum ask, I guess.
And the last question: what do you wish people asked you more often?
What do I wish people asked me more often? How can I help? I think people, when I talk to people a lot, everyone's very interested in what's going on, and I think, yeah, and not just me. I think anyone really, having that mindset into the people that you interact with every day. How can you help them? Because everything is a two-way street. Everything's our world is built on relationships, and relationships are reciprocal, and so I'm happy to help anybody, and I try to ask that whenever I can, and how do I help them in what they're doing and what their pursuits are, and asking others how they can help. That's I think the best advice I can always give.